The morning sun painted the Oklahoma Territory prairie in shades of gold and amber when the first rifle shot cracked across the vast emptiness. Isabella Hart's fingers clenched the wooden seat of the wagon as dust clouds erupted around her wedding party. Her cotton-wrapped eyes useless against the terror unfolding in the September heat of 1891. Riders coming hard from the north. Samuel's weathered voice cracked with fear as he fumbled for the shotgun beneath his seat. The old driver's hands trembled as 7 mounted figures thundered toward them across the hardpan, and their war whoops echoing off the distant mesas like the cries of demons. Isabella pressed her bandaged eyes against the rough wool of her traveling dress, trying to make sense of the chaos through sound alone. The attack on her father's kitchen stove 6 weeks prior, when grease had exploded in a ball of flame, had stolen her sight perhaps forever. Now traveling toward her arranged marriage to Jebediah Croft in Willow Springs, she could only listen as death approached on horseback. "Maybe they just want the horses," Samuel whispered, though his voice carried no conviction. Behind them, the second wagon bearing her dowry chest rattled and creaked as young Billy Morrison tried to control his panicked team. The outlaws' leader, a man whose voice carried the rasp of whiskey and cruelty, called out as they surrounded the small caravan. "Well, now what have we here? A wedding party by the looks of it." Isabella felt rough hands seize her shoulders as she was dragged from the wagon seat. The scent of unwashed bodies and gun oil filled her nostrils. "Pretty little thing, even with them bandages," the man continued with mock gentleness. "Shame about the eyes, though. Damaged goods ain't much use to nobody." "Please." Isabella managed her voice steadier than she'd expected. "Take what you want, but let us pass." The outlaw barbed wire bill, she would later learn, laughed with genuine amusement. "Oh, we'll take what we want, missy. Question is whether you'll be alive to see your wedding day." "She can't see nothing anyway, Bill," another voice chimed in. "Blind as a bat." Isabella's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she forced herself to remain still. In the distance, she could hear the sounds of the other wagon being ransacked. Her dowry chest dragged across wooden planks, her precious belongings scattered in the dust. "Got it," someone called out. "Heavy as sin, just like we was told." The words sent ice through Isabella's veins. Just like we was told. This wasn't random highway robbery. Someone had specifically directed these men to her wedding party. Someone who knew about the chest and its contents. A gunshot shattered her thoughts. Samuel's body hit the ground with a wet thud, and Isabella bit back a scream. Poor Samuel, who had driven for her father's freight business for 15 years and volunteered to escort her to Willow Springs despite his advancing age. "Billy Morrison," Bill called out to the younger driver. "You can ride out of here alive, or you can join old Samuel in the dirt. Your choice." "Don't kill me, mister." Billy's voice cracked with terror. "I got nothing to do with this. I'm just hired to drive." "Then unhitch them horses and ride south. Don't look back and don't come back." Isabella heard the jingle of harness as Billy frantically unhitched his team. Hoofbeats receded rapidly toward the horizon, leaving her alone with 7 armed men and no hope of rescue. "What about the girl?" someone asked. "Leave her," Bill decided after a moment's consideration. "Blind and afoot in this country, she'll be dead by nightfall anyway. Saves us a bullet." Isabella heard them mounting up the stolen chest, secured to a pack horse. As the hoofbeats began to fade, she realized with growing panic that she was truly alone, abandoned in the middle of nowhere with no food, no water, and no way to see dangers approaching. She had perhaps taken 10 stumbling steps when a new sound cut through the prairie silence, the whistle of an arrow, followed by a man's agonized scream. "What in blazes?" Bill's curse was cut short by the sharp crack of a rifle. Isabella threw herself flat against the rocky ground as gunfire erupted around her. The outlaws' confident voices turned to panicked shouts as some unseen guardian angel fought back with deadly precision. "There in the rocks. I can't see him. He's moving too fast." Another arrow sang through the air, and another of Bill's men cried out in pain. Isabella pressed herself against a boulder, her heart hammering as the battle raged above her head. Suddenly, a warm hand touched her shoulder, not grabbing or demanding, but gentle, reassuring. She nearly cried out in surprise. "Be still," a quiet voice said near her ear. The words were spoken in careful English, but with an accent she couldn't place. "You are protected now." The hand remained on her shoulder as bullets whined overhead, and somehow Isabella found her panicked breathing beginning to slow. Whoever this was, he radiated a calm authority that steadied her more than any words could have. More gunfire echoed across the prairie. She heard horses galloping, men cursing, the wet sound of impact as projectiles found their marks. The battle seemed to last forever, but in reality, it was over in less than 5 minutes. "They are gone," the voice said simply. Isabella turned toward the sound, her bandaged eyes straining uselessly. "Who are you?" "My name is Kanji. I scout for the town of Willow Springs." The voice paused. "You are hurt. Not physically. But Samuel." "I am sorry. He died quickly without suffering." Isabella closed her eyes behind the bandages, feeling tears soak into the cotton. "The outlaws, did they? They took your belongings, yes. But they did not kill you, and that is what matters now." Strong hands helped her to her feet, steadying her until she found her balance. She caught the scent of leather and sage and something else, something clean and masculine, that made her suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. "Can you ride?" Kanji asked. Yes, I reckon so. But I cannot see. I have recovered one of the horses. We will ride together to town." Heat rose in Isabella's cheeks at the impropriety of the suggestion. But what choice did she have? "I suppose there ain't no alternative. None that would see you alive come morning." Kanji helped her mount behind him, his movements careful and respectful. As they began the journey toward Willow Springs, Isabella found herself acutely aware of the man before her. The steady rhythm of his breathing, the confident way he guided the horse across rough terrain she couldn't see. "Kangi," she said after they'd ridden in silence for perhaps a mile. "That ain't an English name." "No, it is Cheyenne." The word sent a shiver through her despite the afternoon heat. The Cheyenne were supposed to be hostile, dangerous enemies of white settlement. The newspapers back in Missouri were full of stories about savage raids and scalping parties. Yet this man had saved her life. "It means raven," he continued when she didn't respond. "Raven," Isabella repeated softly. "Like the bird that sees everything." "Yes, though today it was you who needed eyes." Something in his tone made her suspect there was more to the story of her rescue than simple chance. But before she could ask, the sound of approaching horses drifted across the prairie. There, by the creek bend. "It's Miss Hart, thank the Almighty she's alive." A group of riders approached at full gallop, townspeople from Willow Springs who had heard the gunshots and come to investigate. Isabella recognized the wheeze in one man's voice as Sheriff Martin Pike, whose war wound had left him short of breath, but no less determined. "Miss Hart," Pike called as he reined up beside them. "We heard shooting and came as fast as we could. What happened?" "Outlaws," Isabella said simply. "7 of them. They killed Samuel and stole my dowry chest." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Isabella could feel their stares, their judgment of her compromised condition and unusual rescuer. "The Cheyenne Scout," Pike said finally, his tone carefully neutral. "Might have known you'd be nearby when trouble started, Kangi." "I was hunting when I heard the gunfire," Kangi replied with simple dignity. But Deputy Miles Pike's younger subordinate wasn't content with neutral acceptance. "Mighty convenient timing, if you ask me," he said with barely concealed suspicion. "Indian shows up right when white folks get robbed. Makes a man wonder if maybe there was some coordination involved." Isabella felt tension crackle between the men, like electricity before a storm. "This man saved my life," she said firmly. "If not for him, I'd be dead on the prairie." "Nobody's questioning that, miss," Pike assured her quickly, shooting a warning glance at his deputy. "But we'll need to organize a pursuit if we're going to recover your belongings." As they rode toward Willow Springs, Isabella reflected on the strangeness of her situation. 12 hours ago, she had been a woman traveling toward a carefully arranged future marriage to Jebediah Croft, a respected farmer who needed a wife, and was willing to overlook her damaged eyesight in exchange for her modest dowry. Now she was destitute, dependent on strangers, and under the protection of a man whose very presence seemed to unsettle the other rescuers. Willow Springs proved to be a typical frontier town, a collection of frame buildings and false-fronted stores clustered around a main street that turned to mud whenever it rained. Isabella could smell it before she could see it, a wood smoke and horse manure, fresh bread from the bakery, and the sharp scent of the blacksmith's forge. But as they rode down Main Street, Isabella became aware of something else. The weight of stares, the whispered conversations that stopped abruptly as they passed. She couldn't see the faces, but she could feel the judgment, the curiosity, the barely concealed disapproval of a blind woman being escorted by an Indian. "Lord have mercy," she heard one woman mutter. "Poor thing must be desperate indeed." "Ain't natural," another voice added. "White woman riding with a savage like that?" Isabella's cheeks burned with shame and anger, but she forced herself to sit straighter, refusing to show weakness before these people who seemed so quick to condemn what they didn't understand. They stopped before a neat wooden building with a painted sign that creaked in the evening breeze. "Dr. Ames's clinic," Pike explained. "Best get you looked at before we discuss what happens next." Isabella felt Kangi dismount then, his hands at her waist, lifting her down with the same careful strength he'd shown throughout their ride. For a moment they stood close together, and she caught that elusive scent again, sage and leather, and something uniquely him. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are safe now," he replied, but made no move to step away until she was steady on her feet. The gathered crowd continued to stare and whisper as Dr. Wilbur Ames emerged from his clinic. He proved to be a gentleman in his 50s, with soft hands and a kind voice that cut through the hostile atmosphere like a warm breeze. "Miss Hart, is it? I'm Dr. Ames. Let's get you inside and see to those injuries." He nodded respectfully to Kangi. "Much obliged for bringing her in safely." "My duty," Kangi replied simply, but Isabella caught the slight emphasis on the word, a quiet declaration that he had acted from honor, not convenience. As they entered the clinic, Isabella heard Pike organizing the pursuit of the outlaws who had destroyed her future. "Deputy Miles, gather every able-bodied man with a horse and a gun. We ride at first light." Inside the clinic, Dr. Ames led her to a chair by the window where the evening light slanted through clean glass. Isabella could almost sense its warmth on her face as he began the delicate process of unwrapping her bandages. "Let's have a look at those eyes," he said gently, "and you can tell me what happened out there." As he worked, Isabella related the day's events. The doctor listened with occasional murmurs of sympathy or outrage, his fingers gentle as he examined her damaged corneas with a magnifying glass. "The burns are healing," he said finally. "But I won't lie to you, Miss Hart. There may be permanent damage. You may never see as clearly as you did before the accident." Isabella had been expecting this verdict, but it still hit her like a physical blow. "How much sight might I lose?" "It's impossible to say at this point. We'll have to wait and see how the healing progresses." He began applying fresh salve to her eyes, the medicine stinging despite his gentle touch. "But I can tell you this, you're alive, and that's more than you had any right to expect after what happened today." Heavy footsteps on the porch interrupted them, followed by the clinic door opening without ceremony. Isabella immediately recognized Jebediah Croft's labored breathing, the man who was supposed to become her husband in 3 days' time. "Isabella." His voice was flat, carefully controlled. "I heard what happened." "Hello, Jebediah." Isabella turned toward his voice, wishing she could see his expression. She remembered him as a large man, thick through the chest and shoulders, with hands like ham hocks from years of farm work. "I'm sorry about the dowry. I know we had an agreement." "Had is right." Jebediah cut her off. "Isabella, that chest contained everything we'd planned for. The money for seed, the deed to your father's property, tools for expanding the farm. Without it..." He trailed off, but Isabella understood perfectly. "You're withdrawing your offer of marriage." "I'm being practical," Jebediah said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with his decision. "A man can't afford sentiment in this country. I need a wife who can contribute to the household, not one who'll be nothing but a burden." Dr. Ames cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mr. Croft, perhaps this conversation could wait until—" "No," Jebediah interrupted. "Better to speak plain now. Isabella, you're a fine woman, but facts are facts. You can't see you ain't got no dowry and you're mixed up with Indian troubles. That ain't the kind of situation a sensible man gets himself into." The word stung like acid, but Isabella forced herself to remain composed. "I understand your position." "I'm sorry," Jebediah said, though he didn't sound sorry. "It's nothing personal. Just the way things are." After he left, Dr. Ames continued his work in pointed silence for several minutes. Finally, he spoke with barely controlled anger. "You're better off without him. Man's got the backbone of a jellyfish and half the character." Isabella managed a weak smile. "Perhaps. But that don't solve my immediate problem. I got no money, no prospects, and no family to take me in. We'll figure something out," Dr. Ames assured her. "This is a civilized community. We don't abandon people in need." But even as he spoke, Isabella could hear doubt in his voice. Over the next few hours, as word of her situation spread through town, that doubt proved justified. The widow who ran the boarding house sent regrets no rooms available for someone who couldn't pay in advance. The minister's wife suggested the territorial poorhouse in Denver might be more appropriate for someone in her condition. Even the saloon owner, when approached about washing dishes for meals, took one look at her bandaged eyes and shook his head. By evening, Isabella was still in Dr. Ames's clinic, listening to the sounds of Willow Springs settling down for the night, dogs barking, horses moving in their stalls, the distant sound of piano music from the saloon. Tomorrow, Sheriff Pike's posse would ride out in pursuit of her stolen belongings. She prayed they would succeed, but she wasn't hopeful. Professional outlaws like Barbed Wire Bill didn't leave easy trails to follow. She was still awake when she heard a soft tapping at her window. Moving carefully in the darkness, she opened the shutters to find a small, wrapped bundle on the sill. Inside was a piece of polished river stone, smooth and warm to the touch, with a small hole drilled through its center. A worry stone, she realized, the kind some people carried for comfort. There was no note, but Isabella didn't need one. Only one person could have left this gift, a man who understood what it meant to be judged by others, who had shown her more kindness in a single day than the so-called civilized people of Willow Springs had managed in an evening. 4 days later, Sheriff Pike returned from the pursuit, empty-handed and grim-faced. Isabella sat in Dr. Ames's clinic listening to his report with a sinking heart, while clutching the worry stone that had become her constant companion. Lost the trail at Devil's Canyon. Pike admitted his breathing more labored than usual from the hard ride. Whoever planned this knew what they were doing. Had fresh horses waiting supplies, cached the whole operation professionally managed. You're saying this wasn't random highway robbery? I'm saying somebody wanted your dowry chest, specific-like, and they were willing to kill to get it. Pike's voice grew troubled. Miss Hart, I need to ask you something, and I want a straight answer. Did your father ever mention having enemies? Anyone who might want to hurt him or his family? Isabella considered the question carefully. Her father, Jacob Hart, had been a quiet man who ran a small freight business in Missouri. He'd always seemed well-liked by his customers and competitors alike. No one I can think of, she said finally. Father was a peaceful man. He avoided conflicts whenever possible. What about business partners, anyone he might have had dealings with, that went sour? Sheriff, I'm beginning to think you know something I don't. Please, if there's information that might help me understand what happened. Pike was quiet for a moment, clearly wrestling with how much to reveal. Miss Hart, we found some interesting things when we searched your father's freight office after his death. Correspondence with people in the territorial government maps of mining claims, even some papers written in what looked like Indian languages. Isabella felt her breath catch. What kind of papers? Nothing I could make heads or tails of. But it suggests your father might have been involved in more than just hauling freight. Pike leaned forward in his chair. Is it possible he had business dealings you didn't know about? Before Isabella could answer, the clinic door opened and Kanji entered without ceremony. He'd been notably absent since bringing her to town, and Isabella felt her pulse quicken at the sound of his voice. Sheriff Pike, Kanji said formally, I have information about the attack on Miss Hart. Pike's tone grew wary, and Isabella caught the subtle shift in atmosphere. What kind of information? The kind that suggests this was not about simple robbery. Kanji moved closer, and Isabella caught his familiar scent of leather and sage. The men who attacked her were not ordinary bandits. They were hired for a specific purpose. How would you know that? Because I have been watching them for 3 weeks. The admission hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Isabella felt Pike's tension ratchet higher, could almost hear the man's thoughts racing. Watching them, why didn't you report this to the law? Because I was not certain of their intentions until they acted. And because... Kanji paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Because there are things about this situation that go beyond simple law enforcement. Isabella's fingers tightened on the worry stone. What do you mean? I mean, your father was not the simple freight hauler people believed him to be. He was involved in negotiations that could change the relationship between settlers and tribes throughout this territory. Pike's chair creaked as he leaned back. What kind of negotiations? The kind that make powerful enemies. Kanji replied simply. Miss Hart, do you still have the small wooden box your father gave you before he died? Isabella's breath caught. How could he possibly know about that? Yes, but how did you... Because my grandfather, Chief Redhawk, told me about it before he died last spring. He said Jacob Hart had been entrusted with important documents, and that if anything happened to him, I was to help his daughter understand their significance. The revelation hit Isabella like a physical blow. "You knew my father." "I knew him as a man of honor who risked his life to build peace between our peoples." Kangi's voice grew softer. 3 years ago, my hunting party found him dying of thirst in the desert. We saved his life, and in return, he offered something no white man had ever given us: partnership instead of dominance. Isabella felt tears gathering behind her bandages. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I needed to be certain you were worthy of his trust. And because the knowledge is dangerous, dangerous enough that men have killed to suppress it." That evening, in the privacy of Dr. Ames's back room, Isabella opened her father's wooden box for the first time since his death. Her hands trembled as she lifted out the contents, letters, maps, and most significantly, a leather-wrapped document bearing official seals and signatures. "It's a treaty," Kangi said softly as he examined the papers by lamplight. "An agreement between your father and Chief Red Hawk of the Northern Cheyenne." Isabella's damaged vision allowed her to make out some details: her father's careful handwriting, official seal signatures in both English and what she now knew were Cheyenne pictographs. A treaty about what? Water rights along the Ash River, mining claims, and most importantly, mutual protection and cooperation between settlers and the tribe. Kangi's voice carried a note of amazement. "Your father negotiated a private peace agreement that has prevented bloodshed for 3 years. Is that legal?" "Not technically. Private citizens cannot make treaties with sovereign tribal nations. That authority belongs to the federal government." Kangi carefully rewrapped the documents. But if this agreement was working, if it was preventing conflict and benefiting both sides, it would be a threat to anyone who profits from conflict, Isabella finished. "Like mining companies that want exclusive access to tribal lands." "Exactly. There are men in this territory who have built fortunes on chaos and legal uncertainty. A successful peace treaty would threaten their entire business model." Isabella felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. "So they killed my father to stop his peacemaking efforts, and now they want to kill me to destroy any evidence of what he accomplished." "That appears to be the situation, yes." She was quiet for a moment, absorbing the full weight of her inheritance. Her father hadn't just left her money and property, he'd left her a legacy of peacemaking that powerful men were willing to commit murder to destroy. But there was something else in the box, something she'd missed in her initial shock. A small leather journal, its pages covered with her father's careful handwriting. "What's this?" she asked, holding it up. Kangi examined the journal, frowning as he read. "It appears to be written in some kind of code. Numbers and letters that don't make immediate sense." Isabella took the journal back, running her fingers over the pages. Then suddenly she laughed, a sound of recognition rather than humor. "It's not a code," she said. "It's a poem. Father used to recite it to me when I was little, a verse about birds and their songs. He's used the poem as a cipher, substituting letters based on the pattern of the verse." Working together by lamplight, Isabella and Kangi slowly decoded her father's hidden messages. What they found was a detailed record of his negotiations with various tribal leaders, mining companies, and territorial officials. More importantly, it contained evidence of a conspiracy to eliminate anyone who threatened the profitable status quo of conflict and uncertainty. "Dietrich Arliss," Isabella murmured as they worked through the entries. "Mining syndicate representative. According to this, he's been systematically undermining peace efforts throughout the territory. And profiting handsomely from the chaos," Kangi added grimly. Your father documented payments to outlaws, bribes to officials, even arrangements for convenient deaths among peace advocates. Isabella felt ice forming in her veins, including his own. The entries stopped 3 weeks before his death. But the pattern suggests Kangji trailed off, but his meaning was clear. They murdered him. Isabella's voice was flat, emotionless. They murdered my father, and now they want to finish the job by killing me. Yes, but they made one mistake. What's that? They don't know we've decoded his journal. They think the only evidence is in the formal treaty documents. Kangji began gathering the papers carefully, which gives us an advantage. What kind of advantage? The kind that might let us turn the tables on them. Over the next several days, Isabella and Kangji began planning their response with the methodical care of generals preparing for war. The first step was building allies, people who could be trusted to help when the time came for action. Dr. Ames proved to be a valuable recruit, as did Judge Harrison, the territorial judge who presided over the territorial court. Even Sheriff Pike, despite his initial wariness about Kangji's involvement, came around when shown the evidence of the conspiracy. But building trust wasn't easy. The social barriers between Isabella and Kangji created constant complications. "I don't like it," Deputy Miles said bluntly during one planning session. "White woman and Indian working together ain't natural. Makes folks nervous." "What makes me nervous," Isabella replied tartly, "is the idea that murderers might go free because some folks are too narrow-minded to accept help where they find it." Judge Harrison intervened before the argument could escalate. "The question isn't whether this partnership is conventional. The question is whether it's effective. And from what I can see, Miss Hart and Kangji have uncovered more evidence in a week than our official investigation managed in a month." But the social pressure continued. Isabella found herself increasingly isolated in town shopkeepers who were reluctant to serve her women, who crossed the street to avoid speaking with her children, who stared with wide eyes at the blind lady who talks to Indians. The worst incident came when she attempted to attend Sunday service at the local church. The minister, Reverend Thompson, didn't refuse her entry outright, but his sermon that morning focused pointedly on the dangers of consorting with heathens and the importance of maintaining Christian standards in difficult times. Isabella sat through the entire service, her cheeks burning with humiliation, but her spine straight with defiance. When it was over, she walked out with her head high, ignoring the whispers and stares that followed her. Kangji was waiting outside, his face carefully expressionless. "How was the service?" "Educational," Isabella replied dryly. "I learned that some people prefer the comfort of their prejudices to the challenge of Christian charity. And yet you continue to fight for them." "Not for them," Isabella corrected. "For the idea my father believed in, that people can be better than their worst impulses if someone is willing to show them how." It was in that moment, standing outside a church, where she'd been made unwelcome, that Isabella fully understood what her father had been trying to accomplish. He hadn't just negotiated a treaty, he'd tried to model a different way of thinking about differences, a path toward understanding rather than fear. The plan they eventually developed was complex but elegant. Isabella would travel openly to Devil's Canyon, the site where her father had supposedly hidden additional documents related to his peace negotiations. Kangji would provide escort, but their route and timing would be leaked to Arliss through carefully placed rumors. When Arliss's men came to stop them, a larger force of Cheyenne warriors and sympathetic townspeople would be waiting in ambush. The goal was to capture Arliss and his lieutenants alive, forcing them to confess their crimes before territorial authorities. But the planning sessions were fraught with tension, both tactical and personal. "The canyon has only one way in or out," Sheriff Pike pointed out, studying the hand-drawn maps they'd spread across Dr. Ames's examination table. If our timing is off, if they bring more men than expected, then Isabella and I will be trapped. Kangji finished calmly. Which is why the diversionary force must be in position before we enter the canyon, and why the signals must be precise. What if something goes wrong? Dr. Ames asked. What if they decide to simply kill you both, rather than try to capture you? Isabella felt Kangji's tension in the way his hands stilled on the maps. This was the question that haunted all their planning, the possibility that their enemies might choose murder over negotiation. Then we make sure the evidence survives, even if we don't? Isabella said quietly. Copies of the journal and treaty documents have already been sent to the U.S. Marshal for Oklahoma Territory in Guthrie. If Arliss kills us, it will only guarantee his own conviction. But late that night, as they made final preparations, Isabella found herself alone with Kangji in Dr. Ames's stable, checking their horses and equipment by lantern light. You don't have to do this, he said quietly, not looking at her as he adjusted his saddle. There are other ways to honor your father's memory. Isabella continued loading supplies into her saddlebags, her movements deliberate and calm. Are there? Because it seems to me that running away would dishonor everything he believed in. And if something happens to you, if I fail to protect you. The pain in his voice made her stop what she was doing. In the flickering lantern light, she could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his hands gripped the leather straps too tightly. Kangji, is there something you're not telling me? He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. 3 years ago, I failed to protect someone important to me. A woman from my tribe who believed as your father did that peace between our peoples was possible. His hands clenched into fists. She was killed by men who profited from hatred and conflict. I've carried that failure with me ever since. Isabella felt her heart break for him. What was her name? Morning Star. She was to have been my wife. The admission hung between them like a bridge across a dangerous chasm. Isabella understood now why Kangji had been so determined to protect her, why he'd risked everything to see her father's work continue. I'm not Morning Star, she said gently, moving closer until she could touch his arm. And this isn't 3 years ago. We're stronger now, better prepared. Are we? Instead of answering with words, Isabella reached up and touched his face, feeling the tension in his jaw, the slight tremor in his breathing. Yes, she said firmly. We are. And whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. For a moment, they stood frozen in the lantern light, balanced on the edge of something that could change everything between them. Then Kangji's control finally broke, and he pulled her into his arms. Isabella, he whispered against her hair. I've been trying so hard not to want this, not to hope for something that seemed impossible. Why impossible? Because you deserve better than a half-breed scout with more enemies than friends. Because you could have any man you chose once your sight returns fully. Isabella pulled back to look into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability he was trying so hard to hide. I've already chosen, she said simply. I chose the man who saw me as I really am, not as damaged goods or a burden to bear, but as someone capable of fighting for what matters. When he kissed her, it was with the desperate intensity of someone who'd been holding back for too long. Isabella felt tears on her cheeks, whether his or hers she couldn't tell, and tasted the salt of longing finally acknowledged. Whatever happens tomorrow, she whispered when they broke apart, I want you to know this isn't about gratitude or convenience. This is about love. I know, he said simply. I've known for weeks. I was just afraid to believe it could be real. The journey to Devil's Canyon took 2 days through some of the most spectacular and dangerous country Isabella had ever experienced. Her improving eyesight allowed her to appreciate the vast landscapes they traversed, red rock formations that jutted from the earth like ancient cathedrals' mesas that caught the morning light and held it like golden bowls. But it was her other senses that told the real story. She could hear the tension in Kangji's voice when he spoke, could smell the metallic scent of fear sweat from their horses, could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching from distant ridges. They're following us, she said on the second morning as they broke camp. Yes, 8 men staying about 2 miles back. Kangji finished securing their supplies to the pack horse. More than we expected, but not more than we can handle. When do you think they'll make their move? At the canyon. It's the perfect place for an ambush. Narrow approaches, plenty of cover, easy to control who gets in or out. Isabella nodded, checking her rifle for the dozenth time. Dr. Ames had taught her to shoot during her recovery, and while she was far from expert, she could hit what she aimed at from reasonable range. Are our people in position? They should be as of yesterday evening. Chief Redhawk's son arrived with 12 warriors, and Pike has 6 townsmen spread through the rocks above the canyon rim. Kangji moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. But Isabella, if something goes wrong, if we become separated— We won't, she interrupted firmly. We're going to succeed, and we're going to do it together. Isabella. This time she silenced him with a kiss, brief but intense a promise, and a declaration rolled into one. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. When this is over, she whispered, we'll have time for all the words. But right now, I need you to believe we're going to survive this. I believe, he said simply, and she could hear that he meant it. Devil's Canyon was a slash in the earth, perhaps half a mile long, and 200 feet deep with walls of red sandstone that glowed like fire in the afternoon sun. A narrow trail wound down to the canyon floor, where a spring-fed stream provided the only water for miles around. According to her father's notes, he had cached important documents in a cave system near the spring. Isabella and Kangji descended the trail slowly, every sense alert for signs of danger, knowing that their allies were hidden among the rocks above, but unable to see them. There, Kangji pointed toward a cluster of boulders near the stream. If the cave exists, it should be behind those rocks. They had just reached the canyon floor when the first shot rang out. Isabella threw herself behind a boulder as bullets began ricocheting off the stone walls, their whine echoing like angry wasps. 8 men on the rim. Kangji called out, returning fire with his rifle. Just as we expected. But something was wrong. Isabella could hear it in the pattern of gunfire, in the voices shouting orders from above. There were more than 8 attackers, perhaps twice that many. Kangji, she called out. I think we've been betrayed. Before he could respond, a new voice echoed through the canyon, cultured, confident, and coldly amused. Miss Hart, how delightful to finally meet you properly. Isabella recognized the voice from descriptions she'd heard around town. Dietrich Arliss had come personally to finish what his hired killers had started. Mr. Arliss, she called back, trying to keep her voice steady. I can't say the pleasure is mutual. His laughter bounced off the canyon walls like the sound of breaking glass. Oh, I think you'll find our business relationship quite profitable. You have something I need, and I have something you want. What could you possibly have that I want? Your life, for starters. and perhaps the life of your savage friend. Isabella felt ice form in her veins. The plan had gone wrong somehow. Instead of ambushing Arliss, they had walked into a trap. Their allies should have been firing by now, should have been cutting down the attackers from their hidden positions. The silence from above was more terrifying than the gunfire. "What do you want?" she called out. "The treaty documents your father negotiated with the Cheyenne, all of them including any copies or related correspondence. And that interesting little journal with its coded messages, oh yes, we know about that too." Isabella's blood turned to ice. If Arliss knew about the journal, knew about the code. How? Did you really think your activities in town went unnoticed? That your meetings with the good doctor and the judge were secret? Arliss's voice carried malicious amusement. "Deputy Miles has been quite informative about your little investigation." The betrayal hit Isabella like a physical blow. Miles Pike's own deputy had been reporting to Arliss all along. No wonder their carefully laid plans had fallen apart. "You have 1 minute to decide," Arliss called out. "Bring me the documents, or I'll order my men to finish you both." Isabella exchanged glances with Kanji, seeing her own desperation reflected in his eyes. Their allies were either dead captured or had never arrived at all. They were alone, outnumbered, and trapped in a canyon with no escape. But Isabella's father hadn't raised a quitter. "The documents are in the cave behind the boulders," she shouted. "But I'm the only one who knows exactly where they're hidden." "Then you'll show me personally." "Not until you call off your men and come down here yourself." Arliss's laughter was genuinely amused. "My dear Miss Hart, do you take me for a fool?" "I take you for a businessman," Isabella replied. "And a businessman knows that dead people can't reveal secrets." A long silence followed, during which Isabella could almost hear Arliss weighing his options. Finally, his voice came again, more serious now. "Very well. I'll come down with 4 men. You and your pet Indian will be searched for weapons, and then you'll show me these documents." "Agreed," Isabella called back, though she had no intention of honoring such an arrangement. As they heard footsteps on the trail, Kanji moved closer to her position. "What's the plan?" he whispered. "Get them into the cave system. In close quarters, their numbers won't matter as much. And then we pray your grandfather's spirit is watching over us." Dietrich Arliss proved to be a well-dressed man in his 40s, with soft hands and the kind of confidence that came from never having been seriously challenged. He was flanked by 4 hard-looking gunmen who kept their weapons trained on Isabella and Kanji with professional precision. "You're younger than I expected," Arliss said conversationally as he approached his eyes, taking in Isabella's partially restored sight and travel-worn appearance. "And more attractive despite the damage to your eyes." Such a waste. Isabella bit back her initial response, forcing herself to remain calm. "The cave is this way." She led them toward the boulder cluster, praying that her father's notes were accurate and that there really was a cave system behind the rocks. To her relief, she found a narrow opening that led into darkness. "After you," Arliss said with mock politeness. The cave proved to be larger than expected, a natural chamber carved from the rock by centuries of water flow. Isabella's improved vision allowed her to make out details in the dim light filtering in from the entrance, including something that made her heart leap: additional passages leading deeper into the rock, creating a maze-like system that could provide cover and confusion. "Where are the documents?" Arliss demanded his patience, clearly wearing thin. Isabella pretended to search along the cave walls, buying time while she looked for any advantage. "They should be here somewhere," she said, moving toward the deepest passage. Father's notes mentioned a secondary chamber. One of Arliss's gunmen grabbed her arm roughly. "No more games, lady. Show us what we came for, or—" His words were cut off by the distinctive whistle of an arrow, followed immediately by his strangled cry. In the confusion that followed, Isabella realized that Kanji had somehow produced a knife and was moving with deadly efficiency in the confined space. Isabella dropped to the cave floor as gunfire erupted around her. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space muzzle flashes, strobing like lightning. She crawled toward the deeper passages, hoping to find cover while Kanji dealt with their attackers. But when she looked back, her heart nearly stopped. Kanji was down, blood spreading across his shirt, while Arliss stood over him with a smoking pistol and a look of cold satisfaction. "Your friend is quite skilled," Arliss said calmly, holstering his weapon, "but not skilled enough to overcome superior numbers and firepower." "You bastard!" Isabella whispered, rage and fear warring in her chest. "Just practical. Business is business, nothing personal." Arliss stepped over Kanji's still form and moved toward her. "Now about those documents. And don't try to claim they're not here. We found your father's real cash 3 days ago." Isabella felt the world tilt around her. "What? Did you really think Jacob Hart would hide his most important papers in such an obvious location?" "No, and the real documents were buried near the old mission ruins, exactly where his journal said they would be." Arliss smiled coldly. "We've had them for days. This little expedition was just to eliminate the final witnesses to our activities." The revelation hit Isabella like a physical blow. They'd been played from the beginning, led to this isolated canyon to be murdered quietly and efficiently. But then she noticed something that gave her a flicker of hope. Kanji's chest was still rising and falling. He was unconscious, perhaps seriously wounded, but still alive. "So, what now?" she asked, trying to keep Arliss talking while she inched closer to the knife that had fallen from Kanji's hand. "Now you disappear," Arliss said simply. 2 more unfortunate casualties of frontier violence. The blind girl and her Indian protector killed by outlaws while searching for her father's mythical treasure. Very tragic, very neat. But as he spoke, Arliss made a mistake. Born of arrogance, he moved close enough for Isabella to strike. Her father had taught her that desperate situations called for desperate measures, and she was nothing if not desperate. The knife felt heavy in her hand as she drove it upward, aiming for center mass as Dr. Ames had taught her during their shooting lessons. Arliss screamed and staggered backward, blood spreading across his expensive shirt. "You little witch," he snarled, pulling his pistol again despite his wound. "I'll make you pay for that." But before he could fire, the cave system erupted with the sound of war cries and gunfire. Isabella's heart leaped as she realized what was happening. Their backup had finally arrived, not on the canyon rim where they'd been expected, but in the cave system itself. Chief Red Hawk's son led the charge, followed by Sheriff Pike and 6 townsmen, who had used the same secret entrance Isabella's father had discovered years earlier. The gunfight that followed was brief but vicious, echoing through the stone chambers like thunder. When the smoke cleared, Arliss and his remaining men were either dead or wounded beyond the ability to fight. Isabella found herself cradling Kanji's head in her lap, while Dr. Ames, who had arrived with the rescue party, examined his injuries. "How bad?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Bad enough, but not fatal," Dr. Ames replied as he worked to stop the bleeding. The bullet cracked a rib and tore through some muscle, but it missed the vital organs. "He'll need time to heal, but he should recover fully." Isabella felt tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. "Thank God." "Thank your father's foresight," Sheriff Pike said grimly as he secured the wounded prisoners. If he hadn't mapped out that back entrance to the cave system, we never would have gotten here in time. What about Miles? Isabella asked. The deputy who betrayed us. In custody along with 2 other townsmen who were part of Arliss's network, Pike replied. Turns out this conspiracy went deeper than any of us imagined. In the days that followed, as Kanji slowly recovered from his wounds and the full scope of the conspiracy was revealed, Isabella found herself reflecting on the strange turns her life had taken. A year ago, she had been a sheltered young woman, preparing for an arranged marriage, her biggest concern, and the proper management of a small household. Now she sat beside Kanji's sickbed in Dr. Ames's clinic, reading aloud from her father's journal while he dozed fitfully. The bandages had been removed from her eyes, permanently revealing vision that was damaged, but functional good enough to see the man she loved, good enough to read the documents that would reshape territorial policy, good enough to witness the dawn of a new era in relations between peoples. The U.S. Marshal for Oklahoma Territory in Guthrie wants to see you tomorrow, she said quietly as Kanji stirred awake. There are decisions to be made about your father's treaty. Our treaty now. He corrected his voice, still weak, but gaining strength each day. The documents name you as your father's heir and successor in all negotiations. Isabella nodded, having read that provision herself. What do you think we should do? Honor his vision. Build the schools he dreamed of. Create the peace he died trying to establish. Kanji struggled to sit up, wincing at the pain in his ribs. But do it legally, with official government sanction. No more secret agreements that can be used against us. And us? Isabella asked quietly. What happens to us? Kanji reached for her hand, his fingers warm and strong despite his injuries. That depends on what you want to happen. Isabella had been thinking about this question for weeks, ever since she'd first begun to understand the depth of her feelings for this quiet, honorable man who had risked everything to protect her father's dream. I want to honor the partnership my father created, she said carefully. But I also want to create something new, something that belongs to us. What kind of something? A marriage, she said simply. If you'll have me. Kanji's smile was like sunrise breaking over the canyon walls. Yes, he said without hesitation. Yes, of course, yes. But even as they planned their future together, Isabella was aware of the challenges they would face. The social barriers that had made their investigation difficult wouldn't disappear simply because they'd exposed a criminal conspiracy. If anything, their highly public partnership had made some people even more suspicious of their relationship. The wedding preparations became a test of the community's true character. While some residents embraced the union as a symbol of the new cooperation, Isabella's father had envisioned others remained deeply uncomfortable with the idea of a mixed marriage. Under the statutes of the Oklahoma Territorial Courts at Guthrie, the union was recorded by the county clerk the next morning, giving it full civil standing. Reverend Thompson, who had preached against consorting with heathens, refused to perform the ceremony. But Judge Harrison stepped in, offering to conduct the service under his authority as a territorial official. It's not just a wedding, he explained to Isabella as they discussed the arrangements. It's a statement about what kind of territory we want this to be, one that honors courage and character over prejudice and fear. The preparation for the ceremony became a community effort that revealed both the best and worst of human nature. Dr. Ames and his wife worked tirelessly to organize food and decorations. Chief Red Hawk's son brought tribal elders to participate in traditional Cheyenne rituals. Even Sheriff Pike, gruff and suspicious by nature, contributed his time to ensure security for the event. But there were also those who worked just as hard to undermine the celebration. Anonymous letters appeared threatening violence if the unholy union proceeded. Several prominent families announced they would not attend, and some businesses refused to provide services for what they termed a mockery of Christian marriage. Isabella found the opposition painful, but not surprising. Change was never easy, especially change that challenged deeply held beliefs about race and social order. The wedding took place on a crisp morning in late October, 6 months after the confrontation at Devil's Canyon. The site chosen was the foundation of the Jacob Hart Memorial School, which had been under construction throughout the summer and was nearing completion. Isabella wore her mother's dress, carefully preserved through all their adventures, while Kanji wore traditional Cheyenne regalia that had belonged to his grandfather. The ceremony itself was a blend of traditions, legal vows administered by Judge Harrison, Cheyenne rituals led by tribal elders, and personal promises exchanged by the couple themselves. The attendance was smaller than it might have been in different circumstances, but those who came did so with genuine enthusiasm. Federal officials sat alongside tribal leaders, territorial judges shared benches with Cheyenne warriors, and the children of both cultures served as flower bearers and witnesses to history. As Isabella and Kangi cut the wedding cake that Dr. Ames's wife had baked using honey from the tribal lands, Isabella reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year and a half ago, she had been a damaged woman traveling toward an arranged marriage, carrying secrets she didn't understand. Now she was Isabella Hart White Thunder, co-founder of the territory's first integrated school, guardian of a peace treaty that was transforming relations between peoples and wife, to a man who had proven himself worthy of the deepest trust. "Any regrets?" Kanji asked quietly as they watched their guests celebrating around them, a smaller crowd than they might have wished, but one united by shared conviction rather than mere social obligation. "Only one," Isabella replied, taking his hand in hers. "That my father couldn't be here to see this. He would have loved seeing his impossible dream become reality." "He is here," Kanji said with quiet conviction, gesturing toward the school's rising walls. "In every brick of that building, in every child who will learn there, in every choice we make to build rather than destroy." But even as they celebrated, Isabella was aware that their victory was only the beginning. The school would face opposition from those who believed education should be segregated by race. The peace treaty would require constant vigilance to prevent violations by extremists on both sides. And their marriage would continue to challenge social conventions for years to come. Looking out over the valley that had become their shared home, Isabella saw both the promise and the peril of the future they were building. The landscape was beautiful, but harsh, full of opportunities for those brave enough to seize them and dangers for those who let down their guard. The Jacob Hart Memorial School opened its doors the following spring, welcoming 47 students of various backgrounds, white settlers' children, Cheyenne youth, even a few Mexican and Chinese families who had heard about the experiment and traveled hundreds of miles to participate. Isabella stood in the doorway on that first morning, watching as children who had been taught to fear or distrust each other hesitantly found seats and began to discover common interests. It wasn't perfect. There were still tensions, still prejudices to overcome. But it was a beginning. "Your father would be proud," Kanji said softly as he joined her in the doorway. "So would your grandfather," Isabella replied. They both believed that children could learn to see past differences if adults were brave enough to show them how. The mining cooperative that had grown out of Isabella's inheritance was also thriving, providing employment for members of both communities and funding for other educational initiatives throughout the territory. The peace treaty had been officially recognized by the territorial government and was being studied as a model for other regions facing similar conflicts. But perhaps most importantly, the marriage between Isabella and Kanji had become a symbol of possibility rather than controversy. Other mixed couples, emboldened by their example, had begun to emerge from secrecy. While prejudice hadn't disappeared, it was no longer unchallenged. As the months passed and the school proved its worth, even some of the most vocal opponents began to soften their positions. When the first class graduated and several students went on to successful careers in business and government, the remaining skeptics found it increasingly difficult to argue that integration was harmful. Isabella found herself thinking often of her father's journal and the careful plans he had laid for a future he wouldn't live to see. He had understood that lasting change required more than treaties and agreements. It required people willing to take personal risks for the sake of something larger than themselves. Standing in the classroom where children of different backgrounds worked side by side, Isabella felt the full weight of her inheritance. Not just the money and property her father had left her, but the responsibility to continue building the world he had envisioned. The story that had begun with violence and loss had become something entirely different, a testament to the power of courage over fear, cooperation over conflict, love over hatred. The impossible had become inevitable through the simple refusal to accept that things had to remain as they had always been. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Isabella White Thunder looked toward the future with complete confidence. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would meet them with the wisdom earned through hardship, the strength forged in conflict, and the unshakable knowledge that some dreams are worth any sacrifice to preserve. Her father's legacy lived on, not just in documents and treaties, but in the living reality of a community where different peoples had learned to see each other as neighbors rather than enemies. And at the heart of that community, bound together by love and tested by adversity, stood two people who had discovered that the greatest victories are won not through force, but through the courage to trust, to hope, and to build something beautiful from the ashes of what came before. The blind bride had become a woman of vision, and her covenant with a Cheyenne warrior had become a covenant with the future itself, a promise that love could triumph over fear, that understanding could overcome prejudice, and that two people who dared to dream together could change the world.